Morning, Miriam.
Good morning. Second try.
I assume it's not morning for you.
Not quite, no.
How is it? How's it going?
It's nice. It's nice. It's a different life, you know.
Okay,
What can I say?
that sounds a little mixed, but I guess that's life.
No, I mean, like I'm working from here, so it's not all vacation, right now. But it's like, I mean, it's the best of both worlds because I actually can work because of the time zone difference. It's amazing. I can do it like from 2:30 in the afternoon, which means I have my entire morning for me.
Right.
To myself to do whatever it is that I want. So it kind of like makes me think that like, if I could potentially have a job like that forever, would I like make like, the jump? Who knows?
Okay. I mean, that sounds very, I would say tantalizing, maybe.
Yeah, it's not easy because I know that it's not reality at this point of time in my life. So, but something to consider.
One day. Okay.
One day. Well, one day was always on the map. Let's put it this way.
But not necessarily with working like this.
Exactly. I mean, it's like my job is like making us come back. I'm going to be on vacation during that time, but they're making us go back 3 days a week on August 2nd. So even though they saw that everything could work perfectly fine without us being, in person, but what can I say?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're joining.
Yeah. Your daughter got here okay?
Yeah, she got it safe and thank God. I mean, a lot of stress along the way, but thank God
Ridiculous. My gosh.
it's just the stress. She was nervous and I was nervous and she's nervous about going to her program, but nervous about getting in. And
yeah, I get it. I mean, it's what happened to most people actually.
so we went last Monday night and it was pretty seamless. There was a little hiccup at the airport. The guy was like, oh, she can't travel alone. But then
How old is she?
He didn't know what he was talking about. Anyways, she made it in. She's out of quarantine. She's with her group, and thank God she's great.
Amazing.
So Hanan, I think, is here, and she gets started, and we have a new
Yep.
Masechet. Mazal Tov, I'm finishing Masechet Yuma, which was a fun one. I think they're all fun, but
it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, Yuma it's actually, I mean, it gets challenging in the end. Actually, the end throws you a curveball with all that Gadata and the medicine, but. But really, it's a very focused masachet. It's the stater, the order is very clear. It's built very cleanly. It's actually very, very nice. Sukah, of course, is a fun one because it's very, very relevant. And today's daf is incredibly relevant, but really much too complicated for us to understand. But we're going to try our best. So,
okay,
Hanan, are you with me? Can I get started? I don't see him.
What's that?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure you're ready to go.
Sort of. Just keep going.
Okay, keep going.
Anyway, go.
So today's daf is daf Daled. We started on Friday, so if I count right, it's daf Daled, and we're going to start at the two dots. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday. We didn't learn, but I hope everyone did it themselves. We're at the two dots on daf Gimel on Mebet, all the way at the bottom. Right. So our initial Mishnah in Sukkah is addressing the size of the Sukkah and what's considered to be a Sukkah. Now, it's tricky because we're going to see today. The question of why size matters may have to do with the schach, which we saw with the sukkah that was more than 20 amot, that you don't know you're sitting under schach, right? But today we're going to actually see that has a lot more to do in some ways with the walls. Can you consider a wall to be associated with the roof if the roof is very far or very near to that wall? Right? Is that considered to be a structure if it doesn't have the regular form of a structure? And we're going to see that when we talk about the lower limits, the 10 tfachim, which is the minimum height, that it may very well have to do with the walls, not the schach. So that if you have something that's that low, you don't think of those walls as being a structure. You maybe think of them as being a support, but it's not considered to be a proper structure. So we're going to discuss that all today and beyond today, of course. But the Mishnah said, so now at the two lines from the bottom, let's say your sukkah is above 20 amot, the Mishnah said it's possible. Says the Gemara, what if you have a great idea? Right, you build your sukkah and it's more that you do the measurement and your sukkah contractor was overly exuberant and they built it 25 amot tall. I mean, it's too tall, 22 amot tall. They just got the measurements wrong, right? So you decide, it's not really that easy to cut down the walls, right? Because otherwise the whole thing falls apart. But what you're going to do is raise the floor, right? Which is not uncommon at all. So first you go to Bal Ma'ata, you come to minimize it. Now, of course, you're not making anything smaller, but you're minimizing the distance between the floor and the ceiling. Bikarim uksatot, you put down pillows, right? You put down blankets and pillows and you lay on them and they raise you up by a few amot to 3-4 feet. You make a pile and that gets you close to the ceiling. Says the Gemara, lo havimiut, that doesn't count because these are temporary. I mean, you would never count your floor from the bed, right? You count your floor from the floor. And so that these don't count, and it's still possible. And even if you say, I'm never moving them, these are permanent structure, right? Because Mishum the Batla Dato, it's Adam on top of Daf Dalet. It doesn't, you can't say just because you say something that's unreasonable or not likely to be fulfilled, it doesn't matter. And so the fact is that pillows will not count to make your floor. However, what if you put straw? So you put tevin. Now, tevin, of course, is something that is more permanent. I mean, people store tevin in their grain, whatever it's called, the barn for a long time. But it's not really permanent. So we've seen before, you could take tevin and make seats out of it on Shabbat and that kind of stuff. So let's say you pile tevin up onto the floor of the sukkah and you sit on that, you put your table on that, and you want that to add to your floor. So says the Gemara in 2 lines on the top, Havi mi'ut, tevin would work. If you're bitlo, sorry, tevin would bitlo. If you put tevin and then you say, Rashi says say, some say it just means indicate with your behavior that you are batel, that this tevin is here and you're not moving the tevin, right? Now Rashi makes a very interesting point here, 2 lines from the top, and he says, you say you're batel for 7 days, meaning not permanently, but for the duration of Sukkot, right? That's all that we really care about. So which adds a very interesting layer, because it could very well be, like with our Sukkah, which none of our Sukkot are really permanent, right? But that you add it in and just say, I'm not going to move it for the duration of the holiday, then havi mi'ut, that counts as a new floor, and you can count from the top of the straw to the roof, and if it's less than 20 amot, your sukkah is kosher. And kol shekain afar bitol, certainly if it's dirt, right? Dirt would be even more permanent than straw, because dirt is something that people actually make their floors with. So if you dumped a load of dirt there, that counts. However, what if it's teven ve'in atid lefnoto? You have tevin, put it down, you put down your grain, your straw. You're not mevatel. You don't say, or you don't think, or you don't act in a way that says, I want this to stay here permanently. But you have no intentions of moving it. Meaning you didn't, unlike tevin, you say, I'm putting it there and the cows are coming on Monday and I'm gonna give it to the cows, right? You have no intention. So it's sort of a little bit of a lower level of bitul. Or a first stop, sorry, you put down dirt and you don't say anything. Right, so we don't know what your intention is, and you don't think about it. So that is a machloket Rabbi Yossi Rabbanan. That actually relates to a very seemingly unrelated, but interestingly connected machloket of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan in the Mishnah in Ohalot. It's not. In the Mishnah in Ohalot, and just the context there, is that if a person dies, unfortunately, and is in a room in a house, the whole house becomes tameh, right? That's called tumat ohel. Now, the tumah stops at the ceiling. So as long as there's a tefach between the body of the dead person and the ceiling, that space fills up with tumah, and then it stops when you get to the ceiling. However, if there's no tefach, if the person is in a house or in a coffin or something, and there's absolutely no space between that person and the roof and the ceiling of that coffin, then there is no separation. And then the tumah from that person goes up, extends upwards, theoretically up to Shemayim, which is where you get all these discussions about the plane flying over a cemetery, right? That's where sort of these questions come in, is that if there's no separation between the body of the corpse and the ceiling of the box or of the house, then the tumah goes up ad l'rakia. So the question in Ohalot is, what if there was a house or a box and there was separation, but you filled it up with dirt? Does that dirt make it that there's no separation and therefore tumah is olah or not? So you can see why it's a similar discussion of mechitzot. So Ditznan, what does the Mishnah say? Bayit shimilu teven otzorot. You have a house, right? Hopefully a small house. There's a corpse in that house, and you fill up that house completely with straw or with tzorot or rocks or little small pebbles. Ubitlo, and you say, I'm never moving these, right? Like this person died in the house. We're filling it up. We're never touching this, right? So then mevutal, then it's batel, and then it has the implication that the tumah will be olah ad l'rakia. The tumah will go up to the sky because there's no separation, there's no open space in the house. Okay. So, but the implication of the Mishnah is bitlo in, lo bitlo lo. Only if you're mivatel. So the only time that this teven will fill up the house and will ruin your mechitza, or in the case of sukkah, will help you build a mechitza, is if you are mivatel. But if you're not mivatel, meaning you put it there, but you have no intention of moving it, our case, then it's not a mechitza. It doesn't count. The Taniyallah, and we learned about this right in this Mishnah, sorry, in the Tosefta. Rabbi Yossi says, well, if it's teven, if it's straw and you don't intend to move it, that's considered permanent. Hareyu ka'afar stam. That is like stam afar ubatel, and it's considered to be batel. So again, in the Tumah case in Ohalot, that means that it fills up the space and that the Tumah from the dead body, from the corpse, will go up on the Rakia. But in the Sukkah case, it means that since you put down the straw or the stone or the dirt on the floor of your Sukkah, it raises the floor, and as long as from the top of that straw or earth to the top of the Sukkah is less than 20 amot, it will be a kosher Sukkah. So that's what Rabbi Yaakov says. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says. Continues Rabbi Yossi, if it's afar, is that where I am? Yeah, afar, if it's dirt, uvatid lifnoto, and you plan on moving it, so it's there for today, and you're going to move it as soon as your garden comes in, right? Hareu kistam tevin v'lo batel. Then it's like stam tevin you put down, which you presume is going to be moved because you use it for your animal feed and other purposes, and it's not batel. So that is the machloket. The Tanakama, the Rabbanan seem to say that it is batel. Rabbi Yossi makes it sound, sorry, it's not batel, and Rabbi Yossi says that it is. That's the first case. The next case today's discussion, around 10 lines from the top, is, let's say, this is also a very important practical case, and these cases I'm going in short, but the Rishonim and then the Achronim use these for all kinds of contemporary sukkah questions. Because the case here is, let's say you haytag gavo me'esrim amma. You have a sukkah with a schach which is more than 20 amot tall. Okay, let's say your schach is 21 amot off the ground. Your sukkah is not kosher. However, you have hutzin, yordin betoch esrim amma. You have a lot of I don't know how to translate hutzin, but like branches, coming down. Let's say your schach is, in Israel they often, or even in America, right? You use some kind of branches, right? So that the main part of the branch is 21 amot, but then you have the I don't know how you words for them, but the distal branches, the distant branches coming down below 20 amot, right? The tricky part of this is that it specifically can't be the case where, the thickness of the schach, let's say the thickness of the schach is 3 tefachim, right? And the bottom tefach is within 20 amot, and the top 2 tefachim are above. That's not the case, because that's clearly one unit of schach, right? And as long as the bottom part is within 20 amot, it's kosher. Here we're talking where there's some kind of duality, right? There's a layer of schach up top, then parts of it come down and forms like a second layer lower down, right? But it's from the top part. So again, I think the case of branches, let's say, imagine you have branches that have a lot of nofach. What do you say? Shade in them. A lot of. I'm trying to think of words in English, but because Hanan's looking very confused. But let's say you take like a regular pine tree, right? And pine tree's not a good example. You have a tree that has leaves on the end. So the main trunk of the tree is your layer of schach at 21 amot, or 20 and a half. But then you have branches coming down that form a separate canopy that's within 20 amot of the ground. So so the question is, can you count that sort of second layer that comes down as your schach, because that's within 20 amot of the ground? So says the Gemara, the primary layer of schach is above 20 amot, but there are hutzin, there are branches, there are yordin betoch esrim amma, so then you can view those independently. If the shade that would be obtained by those branches is more than the sun, meaning the branches cover the majority of the roof level, then ksher. Then basically that's kosher. Im lav psula. If not, it's possible. Now, I'm going to just give you a tip off here that the challenge with what I just explained to you, which is the way everyone understands it, is the question of, forget about the branches that are coming down. Why isn't this considered a sukkah underneath another sukkah, right? Because if the top level of schach is at 21 amot, and then the bottom level of schach is at 19 and a half, so what if the 19 and a half is kosher? You have another layer of schach on top of that, and we're going to have in the Mishnah, which is why I'm leave this discussion till later. The whole discussion about Sukah al gabe Sukah, right? If you have one layer on top of another layer. So why don't you view that this way? And again, we'll get into this later when we get to that Mishnah, which will be later this week. But that's the first halakha today of this bright. Oh, sorry, this is Breita. If you are, continues the Gemara, if you are Haita Gevoa Asarat Tfachim, let's say the opposite. You have a sukkah with a layer of stach is exactly 10 or 10 and a little bit tfachim above the ground, which is kosher. But there are branches coming down. Hutzin Yordim L'toch Asara. There are branches that come down within 10. So Savar Abai L'meimar, Abaya thought to say the same thing. That if these branches coming down have more shade than sun, then they're puzzle because it's its own layer of stach. But im chamatam rubam mitzelatam, as long as the branches coming down don't cover a majority of the sunlight, then they're batel because they're not actually providing any shade. So then it's kshera. So you have this very small sukkah, 10 tfachim off the ground. Remember, 10 tfachim is around 3.5 feet, right, off the ground. So you're sitting in it. Maybe you're a very short person or a kid. And you have a layer of schach, and then there's branches coming down. Says Abaya, as long as those branches don't provide more shade than sun, they're batel. They don't count. And then your sukkah is kosher. Says Rava, I don't care if your sukkah is kosher from that standpoint. Hadira sruchahi. That's like a disgusting house, right? Because basically you have this minimal roof, and in the middle of your living room are branches coming into your face. That's possible for a different reason. It's possible because it's not livable. It's what's called a diras srucha, a despised or difficult to live in house. And so therefore I say it's possible regardless of whether these branches provide shade or not. They're possible just because they're there and they make it very unpleasant to be in this sukkah.
What if it's just a temporary dwelling? It's like
It is, but it can't be something you're not comfortable being in.
Oh,
But
come
again,
on.
we'll get to this later as
Only
well.
8 days you could deal with.
So there is a debate whether diras srucha is a doraita or drabanan, right? Is it possible, right? We're going to see later. Let's say you're in a sukkah and you have mosquitoes in your sukkah, right? So according to the Gemara, again, we're going to get into this detail. You're probably not yotze sitting in the sukkah if it's very unpleasant, right? Because no one would sit there, right? If a normal person wouldn't sit there, again, how you define that and what that means, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later. But the point is that you have to want to sit in your sukkah. And according to Rava, this is not a place where anyone would want to sit. Now, even 10 tvachim is difficult to imagine sitting in, right? Because if you're not on a chair, you can't stand in the sukkah. But even sitting down, if you got branches coming in your face, that's possible.
But it's more than sitting because you're supposed to actually be living in it for the 7 days. So there has to be a somewhat level of comfort in it.
Correct. I think one of the questions that we're going to see throughout this whole Masechet, we'll come back to, is how, is it defined by the user or defined by the general user, right? Is it specific? Because we're going to discuss later, what if, it's cold and some people are comfortable in the cold and some people are just intolerant, right? So which of course is reality, right? Or heat. So how do you view the sukkah? And we're going to see later that there are things that puzzle a sukkah and there are things that puzzle the person in the sukkah, right? So it may be up to the individual, but it may be up to the structure. And that's is something to keep in mind as we have all these discussions. Continues the Gemara, another interesting, very interesting case. And again, these are very particular cases, but you can see that the implications are vast. This case is Haitag Gavoa Meisrim Amma. You build a beautiful sukkah, and it turns out, you do the measurements, it's 22 amot off the ground. This grand sukkah, right? You're going to have your bar mitzvah, let's say. And you build this huge sukkah, and it's 100 amot wide, so you want to make it very big. You want to make the ceiling tall, and it's a 22 amma ceiling at the end. Someone miscalculated. The contractor was not orthodox. I don't know. So they got it wrong.
But aren't we holding? There was one opinion that that's okay.
Yeah, but according to the majority opinion, that it's not okay. It's
So
true.
we're going with that.
Correct.
All these assumptions.
All these assumptions. So you come up with a great idea. You say, well, we can build a platform, right? And so this is Rashi's beautiful, not Rashi's, it's Gemara's picture here. Everyone can see it. The white is the ground, and you build a platform. Everyone see that picture to the right?
Yeah.
Every Gemara, I assume, has it. I hope so. It's the Vilna.
Yeah.
So the shaded area is a platform. It's 5 feet off the ground. It's a dais, and the bar mitzvah boy sits up there, and his mother and his grandmother, and everyone's happy.
So the bottom is not on the ground.
So you build the itztaba, which is a platform, which is very permanent. This is not a question of stones or hay, and and you build a keneged dofen emtzai, according to the, remember, most of the sukkot had 3 walls, right? So the middle wall, meaning the wall on the top here, because it was open on the 4th side, you build it against, meaning connected, parallel with that middle wall, al panei kula, and it covers the entire length, meaning it goes from the side, one side wall, the left wall to the right wall. So it has 3 walls, and it's beautiful. Yesh b'hachsher sukkah. It's big enough to be a sukkah on its own, meaning it's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. Kshera, the whole thing is kosher. Now, the reason for that, of course, is that basically you built a separate structure. But Rashi says something here that is fascinating and important and incredibly relevant for many sukkot. Rashi says not only is the part that you're sitting on today is kosher, but the white part is also kosher. The rest
What
of
else
it is
is it?
also kosher.
Which Rashi we were talking about?
We're talking about the Rashi Kshera. Sorry, there's probably a lot of those. If you go down into the middle wide lines, the middle of the wide lines,
Yeah,
the 5th line, 6th of the lines, the word is Kshera.
like the wide lines after.
The medium wide lines of Rashi.
Hechsher Sukah,
Nope.
Kshera. Kol
Kol
HaSukkah.
HaSukkah sheyesh la gimel defanot. The whole sukkah, kol HaSukkah, period. The entire structure is kosher, Rashi says. So remember what we have here. Look at the picture again. It's this beautiful picture, right? I'm using that tongue in cheek, but you have a sukkah where a portion of it on one side is less than 20 amot from the top. The rest of it, which could be 100 feet, is more than 20 amot. Rashi says the entire sukkah is kosher, and he explains that afilo, I'm going down line, afilo min ha'itzdaba v'hala, even from the edge of the platform and the other side, meaning the side that does not have a platform, is kosher. Dimeninan chalala mirosha itzba, because you count the space from the top of the platform, umala, and nimsa dofen amsay kulo kasher. And anyways, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Rashi utilizes this principle called psal hayotzei min hasukkah. You have a incomplete part that leaves the sukkah, and that's kosher. So basically, what Rashi says here is that since you have a kosher sukkah on one side, right, the side that's shaded in, and you have schach that extends from that to another 20 feet, that is considered to be what's called psal hayotzei min hasukkah, which is the shoots that come out of the sukkah, which we're going to say later are kosher, and you can sit under that on sukkahs and be just fine. Which of course has huge implications, because very often when you build a sukkah, one edge of it is not kosher, right? If you do it next to a roof, for example, often the roof hangs over part of the sukkah, or you run out of schach, right? And you have a wider space than the schach, and this has a lot of implications for edges of sukkah. But that's what Rashi says. Tosas does not agree with this, but well, he doesn't totally agree with it. But we'll discuss this again as we go on. But this is what Rashi says clearly here, and it's a very, very important halacha in Sukkot. But anyways, let's continue. So you build your platform, and it has a hefsher sukkah, it's kshera. However, if it's min hatzad, if you build it from the side, right? So this is, you build your platform from the side, and this is the second drawing in our Gemara, the bottom one, where again, you have 3 walls of the sukkah. You build a platform against the right wall here. So it's the same size platform, but it's only touching 2 walls. It's touching the back wall and the right wall. So it doesn't have 3 walls. It only has 1.5 or 2 walls. So then it depends. You need to have a 3rd wall. So im yeshmin svata itztaba lekoto arba amot, if there's more than 4 amot from the left side of this itztaba, of this platform to the wall on the left, then psula, then it's puzzle, because your platform only has 2 walls. Right? Again, I'm going to use north, west, east here. So there's no south wall in our Gemara, assuming that the bottom of the Gemara is south, right? There's a north wall, east wall, but there's no west wall. So if the space from this platform to the west is more than 4 amot, then there's no wall. But if it's pachot me'arba amot, if it's less than 4 amot, then it's kshera, and it's kosher. Now, why is it kosher? And this is a principle that we learned about in Shabbos and Eruvin, and is going to appear throughout our Masechet. And that's the principle of dofen akuma. The wall bends. That's literally what it means. So that if you see from that itztaba in your second picture in the Gemara, to the left wall, to the west wall, if there's less than 4 amot, then you can push that wall. That wall can bend to the edge of the platform and be at that level. And the wall can bend there and count as a complete wall, and therefore the platform is kosher. Okay? Does that make sense, everyone? We're with me? Dofen akuma. Right? The fascinating thing is that according to Rashi, if you sit in that open space on the left, you're sitting in a sukkah, even though the wall is bending over your head, right? Because the imaginary wall is both on top of you and protecting you. This is a fascinating discussion about Dofen akuma. But that's what the Gemara says. If it's mitzvah to itzvah l'kotel arba amot, if there's 4 amot, then it's puzzle. If it's bachot me arba amot kshera. Says Gemara, well, that everyone knows that. Everyone who went to second grade knows that. Ma'ika mashmalanda, I mean Dofen akuma. You're telling me a chiddush that you say Dofen akuma, Tanina, it's a Mishnah later in our Gemara. Everyone who learned Mishnayos knows this. We learned Daf Yomi last cycle. Because what does the Mishnah say later? And the classic case of Dofen akuma is, let's say you have a bayit, shnivchat. You have a house, you have a beautiful flat house, which I guess is how most houses were back then, and your ceiling collapses, unfortunately. But it turns out that it's Erev Sukkos. So you're very, very fortunate because now your ceiling collapsed. You could just put schach on top of it and sit in your house and have a sukkah, right? So a hole opened up in the middle of your ceiling. That's the case. So you've got a 20-foot by 20-foot room, and you have a small hole that opens up in the middle of the ceiling. So says the Mishnah, if you're sikech al gabav and you put schach on top of it, remember there are no walls on top of that, right? You have side walls and you have a hole in the middle of your roof, of your ceiling. So im yesh menakot sikech arba amot, if they're from the wall of your house to the place where you put schach is less than 4 amot, then, I'm sorry, if it's more than 4 amot, psula, because you don't have a wall with under that schach. But hapachot mikan kshera. But you can see from the Mishnah later that if your wall is within 4 amot of your schach, then the wall moves. The wall is dofen akuma. The wall bends to touch the schach. So why did you have to tell me again by your itztaba, by the platform, that you use dofen akuma? We already know dofen akuma. Because no. I would have thought Hatam Hudachashi the Dofen. There, in your house, the wall is a good wall. It's just not anywhere near the schach. So you want the wall to move to the schach. But here, remember, thinking about this wall that's on the left side of my picture, on the west side, that wall is not a good wall because it's 25 amot, right? The wall is puzzle. So you're not only bending the wall, you're bending it and minimizing its size. You're doing 2 steps because you're connecting it to the platform. Hacha, the lochazi ledofen, the wall itself was not a kosher wall for a sukkah because it's 25 amot tall. But here you're bending. Sorry?
I thought the schach can't be higher than 20.
Well, so it's a good point. So the wall schach combination, let's put it that way.
Any wall can't be higher than 20
Sure,
feet?
but the wall and the schach, it doesn't count as a wall of a sukkah. It's not a wall. You can make a house any size you want. It means that it's not a wall of a sukkah because the schach on top of that wall is not kosher, right? So the point here is that not only are you bending the wall, moving it 5 amot over, but you're minimizing it in essence by combining it with a platform which it has no connection to, right? It's not touching that platform. So you're doing basically 2 imaginary steps, and that's the chiddush of lahacha l'chazia l'dofen. It's not really where it is as a wall. Emalo kamashmal, that's not a problem. So that's just the chiddush, is that you're going basically 1 extra step. It continues the Gemara. Let's say hayta gava me'esrim amma. Let's say you have a sukkah that you build, and again, you get the measurements wrong, and it's 22 amot tall. So you have a huge sukkah, 20 feet by, well, more than that, 50 feet by 50 feet, but it's 22 amot tall. It's puzzle, right? But you want to solve it, so you build a platform, but you choose to build the platform in the middle of the sukkah. So smack in the middle. It's not touching any of the walls. Unlike our previous case where you were touching several walls, this is touching nothing, right? Ubana ba itztaba be'emtsaita. You build an itztaba in the middle of the sukkah, not touching any of the walls. So says the Gemara, well, it's not going to be kosher unless it's close to the wall. So im yesh mislat itztaba l'dofen arba amot l'chol ruach, the ruach psula. If there's more than 4 amot from the edge of this platform to the wall, then it's puzzle, because then the wall cannot connect with the platform. But pachot me'arba amot kshera, if it's less than 4 amot, it's kosher. That's the same chiddush. Mike and Mashman, you just told me that. Okay, that's very interesting case, and it's good for pictures, but it's the exact same rule we just said, which is that the wall can spread 4 amot. No, the chiddush here is that there are no walls. I might have thought the dofen akuma is a principle that can apply to 1 wall. meaning you can have one imaginary wall, not imaginary, but one constructed wall, but aval the kol ruach v'ruach lo, right? And there it might make sense. You have two walls. The third one can be an assisted wall. But if you have no walls whatsoever, then I would have thought aval kol ruach v'ruach lo, kamash malam, that that's not a problem either, and that the principle of dofen akuma is no matter how many directions, it's a property of mechitzot, that a mechitzah can spread 4 amot and connect to schach and still count. And obviously, many of us rely on this for our sukkah. Okay, again, it's a huge question from this Gemara and further Gemarot whether you can sit under that dofen akuma, right? Meaning, if your wall is bending to make it a mechitzah, do you think of that as a full wall? And then if you sit under it, you're sitting under the wall, or are you sitting under the schach? And that's a very big question. Now, 3 lines from the bottom. Continues the Gemara, the next case. Let's say you build a sukkah and it's too short. It's less than 10 tefachim. It's 9 tefachim tall. But you're desperate to use it. You don't have another sukkah. So what do? Instead of raising the sukkah, you lower the ground, right?
Oh.
Seems like a reasonable solution. So you start digging into the ground to make it.
Sounds like a clown story or something.
I mean, look, obviously there are circumstances. These are the point here. These are halakhic constructs, first of all. I mean, you can make a case, but I agree. This is just to teach you rules here, right? So, but maybe you have nothing to raise it with. I mean, it could very well be you don't have more wood, you don't have stones, you don't have anything to raise it.
Yeah, I got it.
So you start digging to make it deeper than 10. So says the Gemara, well, of course, if you dig out the entire floor, that's fine. It's no problem whatsoever.
Yep.
Right? You don't need to look at this ground level. You look at the level of your sukkah. But let's say, of course, you don't finish digging, which is why we want to get this case. So if there's more than 3 tefachim from the edge of your digging in the ground to the wall, then it's possible, because you can't use your ditch in the sukkah to be part of the sukkah if it's more than 3 tefachim from the walls. But if it's if it's less than 3 tefachim, you're kosher. Now, remember, says the Gemara, the first question is, why when it was tall, we said as long as the wall is within 4 amot, it's okay. And when you're talking about digging out, you have to get 3 tefachim, which is like, an eighth of the size. Remember, an amma is 6 tefachim. So you're talking about half an amma here.
Yeah.
Right? So Maishna, top line of Daf Dalet of that, Maishna Hata. Why is it by the cases we had earlier today? And the case of Dofen Akuma, the Amrit Pachot Me'arba Amot, you say that the wall has to be within 4 amot, and here, by digging out, Maishna Hata, the Amrit Pachot Mishlosha Tfachim. Well, obviously there's a big difference, because when you have a wall that's 25 amot, that's a wall. Now, it's not a sukkah wall, but it's a mechitza, right? It's a proper wall. You have a house, everyone's houses all the time that are 25 amot tall. It's a very elegant thing, right? Hatam ita ledofen. There you have a wall. What you need for dofen akuma is you need the wall to touch your platform, right? Or to be under where your table. So you have a wall, but you want the wall to bend. But hacha, you don't even have a wall, because a height of 9 tefachim is not considered a wall. It's considered to be something you jump right over. It's a minimal size. It's not considered to be a barrier, right? If you have a fence, it's 3 feet tall. It doesn't stop anything. And so here, l'shvuye l'dofen, you have to turn it into a barrier. You have to turn it into a wall. And to do that, you need to much more, you can't imagine as much. You need much more concrete connection. Here, pachot mishlosha tefachim in, if it's less than 3 tefachim, you can space over that minimal difference. Ilo, low, but if it's not, then it's not, and it's not kosher. So, very important distinction, which is that you need to have 3 tefachim distance or less in order for it to become a wall. If you're talking about a space where the primary wall is less than 10 tefachim, but if you already have a wall and you just want to bend it and associate it with your particular sukkah, your particular platform, then 4 amot is sufficient. You don't need 3 tefachim. Says the Gemara, well, let's get very practical here. Let's say instead of building a platform in the middle, you build a pillar. Okay. Now the difference between a pillar and a platform is that a pillar does not have walls, right? A pillar is just a stand. It's just its own thing standing up. So haitad gavoa me'esrim amma, or 6 lines from the top. If the sukkah is more than 20 amot, so it's pasul. But banaba amud, you build a pillar in the middle of the sukkah, shu gavoa 10 tefachim, and the pillar is more than 10 tefachim tall, meaning it's its own independent entity. Remember in Shabbos, we discussed this many, many times. That when you have a pillar that's 10 tefachim, it's considered a reshut hayachid or a karmel, depending on how big it was, right? But it's not reshut harabim. If you build a pillar in the middle of reshut harabim, it's its own space, right? So reshut hayachid. So you build a pillar in the middle of your massive sukkah, which is pasul. And yesh ba hechsher sukkah. The pillar has big enough size to be its own sukkah, meaning it's 7 by 7 tefachim. So it's a massive pillar, right? Not huge, but 3 feet by 3 feet. That's pretty massive. Savar Abaya Lememar. So Abaya thought to say, well, this seems to be like a platform. Right? Why don't you view this like a platform and say the words, again, these words are hugely important and we'll come back over and over in Sukkah. Gud asik mechitzata. Let the mechitzot spread and go upwards. Asik means go up. So imagine the walls of the pillar go up like a cone, basically, right? Like a shine of light. And basically you are surrounded by walls. And so since there's schach on top of you, and since you're standing on a pillar, it should be kosher. Amarle Rava says, I totally disagree with that. It's true that we let mechitzot imaginarily go upwards, but there you need the inan mechitzot hanikarot v'lecha. You need recognizable mechitzot. You need it to be obvious to the observer that the border that is going up is a mechitza. Here, there's absolutely nothing to indicate that because it's a pillar. And so remember that difference in a mechitza. Mechitza is generally a wall or a fence that has open space inside of it. That's a mechitza. Here it's solid, it's a pillar. And since there's nothing inside of it, you cannot use these imaginary walls to go upwards because it's not nikar. Mechitzot and nikarot, you need obvious or recognizable mechitzot v'leka. Now let's try to prove this from a bright. Says the bright to the following case. Na'atz arbat kundisin. Let's say you put down 4 poles, right? Kundisin are not pillars. They're just like big fence posts. You put down 4 fence posts, meaning 1 on each corner. V'sikach al gabam. And you put schach on top of them. So you have no walls on your sukkah whatsoever. You have 4 corners, which are fence posts, and you put schach on top of that. Says Rabbi Yaakov, it's kosher, which sounds bizarre. You have no walls on your sukkah. But Rabbi Yaakov is machshir. And the Chachamim are posting. The Chachamim say, no way, this is not a sukkah, there are no walls. And says Rav Huna on top of that, about the machloket Tanaim. Amar Rav Huna, machloket al sfat hagag. 1 second. They're arguing when you're talking about on top of a roof. So you have a roof, meaning you already have a house. You have 4 walls on your house. And you go to the roof of that house, and on each corner of the roof, you put a fence post. And then you put schach on top of it, like a gazebo. So there, says Rabbi Yaakov, says Rav Huna, Rabbi Yaakov would say it's kosher because the walls of the house can go upwards and be walls for your sukkah, right? So Rabbi Yaakov says, Savar Aminan good asik mechitzata, that the walls of the house can go upwards and they count for the sukkah, and you don't need any walls because you use the walls from below. And Rabbanan Savri, no, you don't say lo aminan good asik mechitzata. You don't say that. You have to have real mechitzot. Aval be'emtza hagag, if you put your 4 fence posts in the middle of the roof, meaning not touching each other, right, but not against the outside of the roof, then there's no walls to go up, right? Then divrei hakol psula. Everyone would agree that it's pasul because you cannot say that the walls of the house go up. There are no walls in the house, right? So that seems to be clear. And Rav Nachman says, I disagree. Be'emtza hagag machloket, that they even argue, or they argue, when it's even in the middle of the roof. Meaning if you put 4 poles, not outside, not in the corners of the roof, but somewhere inside the space of the roof, and you put schach on top of that, it's still a machloket Rabbi Yaakov and the Rabbanan, whether it's kosher or not. I'll ask the Gemara. When Rav Nachman says they argue even when it's in the middle of the roof, is that be'emtza hagag machloket? But if it was al sfat hagag, if it was on the corners of the roof, divrei hakol kshera, would everybody agree? Meaning even the Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Yaakov that that's kosher. Or Dilma bein bezu machloket. Or maybe they argue about both. And all Rav Nachman is adding is that Rabbi Yaakov even argues when it's in the middle of the roof, not just when it's on the corners of the roof. And since we're take it, we don't have an answer to that question. But there's a machloket again. Whether remember the basic machloket is Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim. It's a Tanaic machloket, which is that you put down your 4 fence posts, you put schach on top of them. Rabbi Yaakov says it's kosher, the Chachamim say it's pasul. According to Rav Huna, that's only because you're talking about the corners of the roof. And since you're talking about the corners of the roof, the machloket is whether the walls of the side go up, whether the walls of the house continue extending upwards to surround the roof, essentially, or not. But according to Rav Nachman, they argue at least in the middle, maybe only, but certainly at least in the middle, even when there are no clear walls to go up. Now ask the Gemara this machloket. It says in a Braita, Na'atz arba kundisin ba'aretz. Let's say you stick 4 fence posts in the earth. Now this is like the middle of a roof, right? Because there's no walls coming up from below the earth to imaginarily surround this. So Na'atz arba kundisin ba'aretz. V'sikech al gaban, and you put schach on top of them. Rabbi Yaakov machshir. Here Rabbi Yaakov clearly says it's kosher, which goes against Rav Huna. Rav Huna said that they only argued on the edge of a roof. And when you're talking about the earth, there's no edge of the roof. So Rabbi Yaakov is machshir, the chachamim poslim. The chachamim say it's possible. Says the Gemara, haaretz emsa hagadami. The earth is like the middle of a roof, meaning there's no mechitzot below it that are recognizable. And clearly, even though it's the middle, it's like the middle of the roof, right? Where am I? Haaretz emsa hagadami. The kamach Rabbi Yaakov clearly says it's kosher. Tiyufta de Rav Huna, tiyufta, this in fact is a fatal blow to Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said that Rabbi Yaakov will only argue if it's the corner of a roof, so you can imagine the walls of the house going upwards. But here, when you're talking about the earth, there's no roof to talk about, and Rabbi Yaakov disagrees. Says the Gemara, well, is it a question of Rav Huna about both? Is it possible, says the Gemara, this is the Gemara speaking, is it possible that be'emtzahu depligi, that the reason the Braita said the case about the earth is to tell you that they only argue, Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim, when it's in the middle of the roof. Aval svatagad divrei hakol kshera. Perhaps if you were talking about putting these posts on the edge, on the corners of the roof, everyone would agree that's kosher. Maybe it's a question of Rav Huna about both, meaning this proved that the Chachamim would admit that it's kosher when it's on the edge of the roof. Says Rav Huna, well, you can't prove that. Rav Huna, no. It's possible that pligi be'emtza agad, that they argue about the middle of the roof, and that's the equivalent case of on the ground. And they also argue they also argue about a case of where you put your fence posts on the edge of the roof, where although you can imagine the walls of the house going upwards, the Chachamim seem to say we don't imagine that. And the reason, the reason they said this particular case is to tell you that Rabbi Yaakov's opinion that it's kosher is afilu be'emtza hagad nami machshir. Okay, so that is the where we stand here about this machloket. Again, it's very confusing. I hope everyone's clear. If not, I would encourage you to buy one of those books that have pictures, because the pictures make it much clearer if you need them or if you have a Gemara that has them. But it's not that complicated yet. But essentially, the issue here is where you take 4 big fence posts, right? You plant them in the ground or you plant them on the top of your roof and you put schach on top of them. There are no walls whatsoever, right? Or there's mosquito netting for walls, but there's no functional walls whatsoever. So here there's a machloket between Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim as to whether that's kosher. And it seems that that at least part of the reason might be because if it's on the corner of a roof, that you can imagine the walls of the roof going upwards, and that's called good asik. The walls are going up, but it's not clear what exactly you'd be relying on if it was in the middle of the roof, because you cannot have mechitzot going upwards. Okay, I don't have the pictures, Chanam, but I guess you do. Let's do one more case. If everyone still has the energy, we're 10 lines from the bottom. We're not quite finished the daf. Tanur Abanan, one last case, which will clarify this to some extent. We're good? Tanur Abanan says the Braita, Na'atz arba kunditin ba'aretz. Let's say you plant 4 fence posts in the land, in the earth. The sikech al gabam, and you put schach on top of them. Rabbi Yaakov says, Rabbi Yaakov says this is kosher. Says Rabbi Yaakov in this Braita, which is in the Tosefta, I don't think you understood me correctly. The reason I say it's kosher is not because you imagine that the earth goes upwards, right? There's no mechitzah to go upwards. If you are on the edge of a roof, again, the case, I want to make it very clear. If you're on the corner of your roof, you can imagine that the walls of the house go upwards and they provide walls for your sukkah. that's called good asik, right? But if you're in the middle of the roof, or if you're in the middle of the ground, there's nothing to imagine that goes upwards. Why do I say it's kosher, says Rabbi Yaakov? It's because the fence posts have to be around 4 by 4 inches. They can be round, right? They have to be big enough that basically if you cut them out, we have the words here. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, Roin kol she'ilo yichukak, yichakiku, v'yichalku v'yishman tefach l'kam v'tefach l'kam. You have to imagine, you have a round fence post, a round pillar. If you dug it out and made it, two dimensions, so I don't know how you say that, but a north-south and an east-west, right? Meaning not round, but you have 2 sides to it. If each one had a tefach, so meaning the round thing was like 5 1/4 tefachim, right? Because of hypotenuse, right? So if each one had a tefach, then that counts because that's a wall itself. Then it's called miduna mishun diyumad. It's a diyumad. Diyumad, remember, is a nutriken. It's a combination for dio, which means 2, and amud, and a pillar, and a fence, and a wall, right? So remember, we had this in Shabbos, that you can take a round thing, and you can imagine that it has 2 walls, right? Meaning one, if you look at my hands, I don't know if it's clear, like that, basically. So you basically have 2 things coming out, and if you have that on each corner, that's what you can rely on for your walls, right? So then you imagine it's 2 directions, but imlav eini dunim mishum diyumad. Shahaya Rabbi Yaakov Omer, because Rabbi Yaakov said that the yumde sukkah tefa, in order for a small barrier to count as the foundation of a wall for sukkah, it needs to be a tefa. That's it. So again, according to Rabbi Yaakov, this is fascinating. We don't do this, of course. You can build a sukkah by taking corners and making 1 tefach in each direction and make 4 corners that way. And then put schach on top of it and have nothing in between the corners, or have mosquito netting in between the corners, right? But nothing solid. And that would count as your sukkah. Because as long as the corner was a tefach and the corresponding corner is a tefach, they match basically, right? And that counts.
So there's really no walls. There's just a
There's
little.
really no wall. But as long as you can't do it with less than a tefach, but as long as there's a tefach, that's enough.
That's like a virtual wall.
Correct. However, the Chachamim say, Chachamim say no such thing. You can never rely on these imaginary diyumdin. You have to have at least 2 solid, complete walls, and then the 3rd one only has to be a tefach. But you do not rely on these corners, on these brackets. Now, if you recall, we have to see. Sorry?
He's trying to apply these Eruvin principles to the sukkah.
Exactly. I was going to say, this was the principle that we had in Eruvin. Remember, we talked about the very common and unfortunately challenging case of where you had a well, right? People were walking on Shabbat.
Right.
There was a well. The well is in a Rishut HaYachid, but the above the well is Rishut HaRabim. It's in the middle of the street.
Right.
So if you pull water out of that well, you can't drink it because you can't pull it from the Rishut HaYachid to Rishut HaRabim. So the Chachamim made up this idea that you can build these virtual, but obviously if you build a wall around the well, you defeat the purpose because you can't get there.
Yeah.
They built these diyumdim. Remember we had those pictures in Arabic.
Yes.
Where you had the animals could go through. Remember, wide enough for that. But that was a principle that was kosher for Shabbos, for Eruvin. But Rabbi Yaakov applies that to Sukkah as well, and the Chachamim do not. They say it's totally not applicable. No matter how big the wall is, it doesn't count. You need to have 2 solid walls, complete walls, and then 1, at least a tefach. We'll stop here because the next week is very easy and it goes on for a while. And we can pick it up tomorrow, I hope.
Very abstract.
It's very abstract. I don't know if it's easier. I see it in my head because I've done it a lot. But I think the pictures really help. But to be honest, the Rishonim and then the Achronim start applying these in many, many circumstances. And just start thinking about it. Like my parents have a sukkah where they use the house wall, but then there's a gutter that goes, which I think is very common, obviously, right? It goes down and they put the schach up to the gutter, right? So the question then is, it's kosher because it's within 4 amot, right? But can you sit under that, right? That's one question. And then what if you don't put the schach all the way to the gutter? What if there's air? So we're going to see in a little bit, we're going to see that coming up, that air is a much bigger problem than schach puzzle. At schach puzzle, you can sometimes imagine. But if there's nothing there, then it's a little bit of a problem, a bigger problem. And the case that we had today, when the sukkah was 25 amot tall, right? And you built a we call a dais, right? In part of it, the part that didn't have the dais at least has schach. It's just not kosher schach because it's 25 amot tall. So that is where you say that the wall bends, dofen akuma. But if it was air, then you probably wouldn't say that, right? And that's where a lot of these questions come in to what's kosher at the edge of a sukkah. When can you attach it to a wall, and when can't you, and can you sit under that space?
It's all about like imagining space.
Yeah, but you have to be consistent, presumably. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Have a great week, everyone. No, we're gonna learn next Shabbos. I have to just check with the rabbis that they're okay with it, but
Your next Shabbos,
it's Erev Tisha B'Av.
I know, you're here?
I'm here, yeah. So we'll do an hour before Mincha, and we'll try to do as much as we can. We can try to do both dapim, or 1.5,
Right, okay, sounds good.
because we're not gonna learn next Sunday morning.
Right,
It's Tisha
I
B'Av.
got it. Yeah. Thanks, Ellen.
Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Welcome, Mary.